This is Getting On With Life, Biblical Wisdom for Successful Christian Living. And this title is, What's Your Smell? I visited the home of friends who had recently lost an elderly loved one. I assisted them in cleaning up the rooms where the loved one lived. When I felt chilled by the cool afternoon air, I asked why so many windows and doors were open. The lady of the house advised me she wanted to get rid of the old man smell in the place. That surprised me, because I couldn't smell anything. I've often noted that my wife is more sensitive to odors than I am, but I can still sniff things out pretty well too. That situation reminded me of a chap I tried to help many years ago. He lived alone, and his smell was pretty strong. The smell permeated his clothes, and so he just lived with the hermit smell all the time. He didn't know he smelled, but I suggested he needed to use a deodorant and gave him peppermint oil to use to neutralize his odor. He never did anything about his odor for the few years I had contact with him. To this day, he probably doesn't realize just how potent his pong is. Being ignorant of something doesn't change reality. If you have no idea of your smell, it doesn't mean you don't smell. In many areas of our life, we need those around us, those who care about us, and God Himself, to make us aware of things we haven't recognized. One really critical area that most of us don't smell is the moral quality of the world around us. When a whole culture smells of a particular moral quality, that quality becomes normal, and no one is conscious of it. On my first trip to India, the team leader told me I would smell Chennai, formerly Madras, before we landed. I did. The air was laden with a cocktail of sewer, smoke, smog, and grime. Once immersed in that smell, you just have to get used to it. You can't get away from it, so you tend to turn off to it. But the smell is there nonetheless. God is attentive to the moral smell of people and places even when we can't smell anything. Because God is a moral God and we are His creation, we exist in a moral universe. Everything that is morally wrong is tainted and stinky to God. We can become quite accustomed to things, dulling our senses, or never sensing what is around us. But God, who is perfect and holy, doesn't adjust Himself to immoral things. Because God is perfect, there are things that we as humans might accept that God cannot accept. He smells stinky things we don't even notice. When God judged the 7 Canaanite nations and sent Israel to destroy them, it was not just to give that land to Israel, but to bring judgment on a people who stank in God's nostrils. These nations did a host of things that were wicked. Note Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 5. It is not by your righteousness or uprightness of heart that you are going in to possess their land, but it is because of their wickedness that the Lord your God will drive out these nations before you, to keep the promise He sware to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the Bible also says, when you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominable practices of those nations. There is not to be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination, or tells fortunes, or interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. That's Deuteronomy 18, 9-12. Many people today think nothing of living for material goals, or practicing Eastern religions through meditation and martial arts, or sexual intimacy outside heterosexual marriage, or sidelining God in their life and decisions, or treating the Bible with contempt. Rebellion, independence, self-will, perversion, greed and lust, godlessness, abuse, selfishness, and a host of other unholy things are just the normal way of life for many in today's culture. So guess how we might smell to God? To give you a sense for the fineness of God's sensitivity, let me refer discreetly to the matter of sexual intimacy in marriage. We know that it is God's order and God's creation. We are told that such intimacy is undefiled. In Hebrews 13:4 it says, marriage is honorable in all, and the marriage bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge. Yet when God was going to meet with the Israelites, God required that the people abstain from normal marital intimacy for 3 days before God came to them. In Exodus 19:14 and 15 we're told, "When Moses came down from the mountain to the people, he consecrated them, and they washed their clothes. Then he said to the people, 'Prepare yourselves for the 3rd day, abstain from sexual relations.'" There is nothing immoral about sexual relations in marriage. Yet God, preparing the people for Him coming to them, required an even higher standard of cleanness, that they had not had sexual intimacy. The same standard came up when David asked for holy bread to feed to the men who were with him. In 1 Samuel 21:4 it says, "The priest answered David, 'I have no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread which your young men can have, if they have kept themselves from women.'" I don't know what your ideas of holiness are, but this simple example shows that God grades things at a much higher standard than any church I know. So it's quite likely that you and I, and those around us, have an unholy smell about us that we don't recognize. That's not a cue for us to become legalistic and buried in holiness rituals, but it is a prompt for us to recognize that we are unclean people, living among a generation of unclean people. Note what Isaiah said in Isaiah 6:5. "I said, Woe is me, for I am undone. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." Our culture stands in a very precarious place due to the stink and the cry of the land rising to God. Our Christian heritage has been crushed and crumbled over recent decades, and things that are offensive to God have become popular things to support. Those who stand up for God are attacked. Before you get all worked up about what is happening in the wider community, take a moment to stop and ask yourself, what's your smell? God bless you.